You are watching After the Hearing, a streaming special we have here on WFAA on the Karmelo Anthony appeals. We're going to break down everything that happened today and what's going to be happening in the next couple of days. In June, a jury convicted Karmelo Anthony of murder, and he was sentenced 35 years in the stabbing death of Austin Metcalf. We have an esteemed panel here. Let's start with Todd Shapiro.
I don't know about esteemed, but okay. I appreciate the compliment.
You're here.
Thank you.
And you know law.
I'm here, I know law, and I'm sweating, so let's do it.
It is warm.
It is really hot.
Warm.
Yes.
Longtime defense attorney.
Yes, sir.
We have crime and justice reporter Rebecca Lopez. Let's break the news first.
Yeah.
What happened today?
So today, a visiting judge, or a judge that was appointed by the presiding judge, who is Judge Wheelis here in this area, basically appointed a new judge, Judge Sid Harle, and he heard arguments from the defense on whether or not Judge Roach, the original judge in this case, should be removed, and he ruled yes, he should, and he removed him off this case.
This hearing lasted only an hour and 20 minutes. Your initial thoughts on the ruling?
Well, I'll be honest, I can't recall sitting in a recusal hearing and intently listening to what's presented. So one of my curiosities as an attorney was, what evidence are they going to present in this hearing? What, besides Roach being called to testify himself in the video, obviously, are there other witnesses? What exhibits? And that was answered in the courtroom. I mean, it was really a succinct, specific, pointed motion, and the evidence that was provided was enough to sway this judge and say, yes, Roach needs to be recused.
So Judge Roach is out,
Yep.
right? Let's talk about the rubric that the Judge Sid Harle used to make that determination.
Right. So it was. I don't want to say confusing, but it was a legal point that he made, basically saying y'all filed this motion for recusal and listed a number of different reasons. I'm going to rule on your recusal based on one point that was brought up, and that is that reasonable person standard from the outside looking in at the proceeding, whether or not things were done fairly and impartially and can continue to be fair and impartial. And he believed that Judge Roach's comments to a particular reporter here in Dallas on a particular date that is standing a foot from my left, that he asked the questions and the Roach gave answers that kind of tended to show that he's maybe made his mind up on the motion for new trial before it ever even happens. So I do think that a part of it from our judge today was an abundance of caution. The appeals process is a confusing thing as well. What's in front of the court right now was the recusal motion first and now a motion for new trial over the next day or two. That does not include his quote-unquote appeal, okay? So this is not about his appeal. One of the things that this ruling did is take away the possibility of this being a point for appeal, saying that the judge denied our motion to recuse, Roach heard it, denied the motion for new trial, and now we're going to use that in our appeal to say, once again, this is another reason why this case should be overturned.
Well, one of the things that the defense attorneys were also trying to say is that he violated these canons, basically that governs what judges can do, and they felt that maybe he overstepped in what he was doing when he did the interview with Jobin, but also that he was biased. And basically, Judge Harle said, I did not find that to be true.
Correct.
He just had a different measure about why he removed him.
Yeah, listen, I understand what Judge Roach was doing. I think he ran an incredible trial. It was efficient. It was fair. There wasn't anything about any rulings of evidence coming in or going out that looked to be problematic. Judge Roach himself did not act in a way that would lend itself to say that he wasn't fair and impartial. It was the interview after the fact that is causing these issues, and the question becomes, if this case was still in his jurisdiction or pending in his court, especially the motion for new trial, which is heard by the trial judge, why didn't he just wait maybe a few more weeks until that was all settled and then be able to talk? I mean, we all know Judge Roach is on his way out, that this was his last big trial. But nobody likes to be turned over on appeal, and nobody likes to be the subject of, you did this wrong, even if he is retired. I know he's still going to sit as a visiting judge and things like that. And he's got a perfect record of never being overturned on appeal. So, was it a lapse in judgment on Roach's part to give the interview? I mean, who knows? But at the end of the day, it does not change the fundamental landscape of this case, which is tomorrow and the next day, they've got to prove why they think they deserve a new trial, regardless of who the judge is.
Let's talk about the evidence. The majority of the time was us listening to the interview we did. It's a 20-minute interview. And I asked you this question just a few minutes earlier before this, and that was it the act of doing the interview that probably led to this decision, or what he said in the interview?
Maybe a combination of both. I think they interpreted the jury got it right comment, or they did, what that meant to me was if the jury came to a verdict, that's why they got it right. Whether it was guilty or not guilty is none of my business as the judge, but they got it right by listening to the evidence, deliberating the issues, coming to a verdict, deliberating during punishment, and coming to a punishment verdict. So in that sense, the jurors got it right, but I think that was interpreted as, well, that means he thinks that Karmelo was guilty, and he's going to view the motion for new trial in that lens.
But
to me, that was one argument.
Todd, how unusual, because I've covered trials for a long, long time in courts. I don't recall a judge doing an interview while the appeals process is still going on in his court and he may rule on it. That's really unusual.
I agree with you, and looking back on it in retrospect, I'm sure he probably feels the same way as maybe I should have done that interview. It's not like he got on there and said anything again that was fundamentally unfair, but given the interview probably was the impetus for the recusal.
Don't you think, it's a valid argument from the defense?
I do think it's a valid argument. I think Russell did a fantastic job. He's a great lawyer. He was incredibly prepared, extremely articulate. He got to the point, established what their points are for the recusal, and it was an interesting situation because, the state was there and they got to make an argument. Well, the state doesn't represent Judge Roach. Yeah. So the state really doesn't have a position other than to say he got a fair trial and we believe in the verdict that the jury reached. Otherwise, we're not here to defend Judge Roach. That's not my job as a prosecutor. So it's almost like they were a little bit of a fish out of a water. It was more the defense trying to convince this new judge that Roach needed to be gone.
Collin County DA's office, Bill Werski says, I don't know why I'm here.
Right. I'm
not here to defend the judge. I like the judge and I think he did a good job.
Right, exactly. Right. It just was a awkward two-step, I would say, that you don't usually have. Normally in a court proceeding, you've got opposing parties that are arguing for opposite things. In this case, it was a defense motion, an argument, and the state kind of going, I think the guy got a fair trial, and that was really it.
Yep. And he says it's not my job to be here to defend Judge Roach's actions. However, according to Bill, he felt that he did and ran a fair trial.
Right. So, Rebecca, we had the video interview, right? And now we also have Russell Wilson mentioning the public's access to the courtroom and violations of the Sixth Amendment. Can you speak to that argument?
I think that was one of the biggest concerns in the trial when this was all going on the first time, because so many people felt like they got excluded from the courtroom. And while he didn't close the courtroom was open, people were being turned away. They had to get here at 5:30 in the morning or 4:30 in the morning. Some people were spending the night in their vehicles trying to get in just to see this trial. And because it wasn't live streamed, which according to Russell Wilson, should have been, people felt like they didn't get to see what was really happening inside the courtroom and relying on what people were saying that were in the courtroom and how they were tweeting things and how they were posting things on Instagram and what they were reporting. And they just felt a better and more fair way to do this would have been to grant more access to the public, even if you had an overflow courtroom where more people could have seen what was going on.
To an extent, I understand what you're saying. I don't necessarily agree with it. Judge has to weigh a number of different factors in a case like this. He needs to weigh the safety to the public. He needs to weigh crowd control. He needs to weigh safety of the witnesses, which Judge mentioned numerous times. There were juveniles. We didn't want their information getting out. You've got to weigh the safety of the jurors to feel like they can do the right thing. And plus, Judge brought up a great point. You put cameras in the courtroom, it fundamentally changes the tone of the trial. People start talking to the camera. They start acting in ways they wouldn't normally act. Nobody wants that. So him not allowing cameras in the courtroom, I think, is wholly supported. That decision is wholly supported by the law. Secondly, this access issue, the public had access to this trial. It's not like it was held under lock and key. You just had to get here and get in line like the rest of the public was told. The trial starts at this time. If you want to get in line and be here, so be it. There are only a limited number of seats in the courtroom. So it's not as if everybody could have fit in there anyways, but I do understand, hey, why not do an overflow like there was today with closed circuit? That might have alleviated some of the
But Todd, this could have been mitigated if we were to have cameras in that courtroom, right?
I guess. Hypothetically, I'm all for full exposure like that and full disclosure, and these are public trials and the public has a right to see it, but I understand the reasons why he decided to keep the cameras out as well. because I think they were valid.
He also pointed out that, or Bill Wurtsky pointed out actually, that people were getting death threats in this case, and that Karmelo Anthony's lawyers were actually in agreement with some of what they decided about whether or not they should stream and how open should the courtroom be, because there were concerns about Karmelo's safety as well. At least that's what Bill Wurtsky said, that there were these agreements that were made by everyone before trial.
Yeah. Can we talk about the process? We're talking about restricted access. The process to get into the courtroom this morning was what?
It was a little smoother than it has been. People came up and they were given cards, and there were 40 cards. They did open up more seats in the courtroom.
What time did you get here this morning?
I got here around 5:45.
Okay.
And I did get number 40, so I was the last one. Took the last seat. But here's the thing: is that people got here really, really early as well. They did open up more seats because they put the media in the jury box, since there were no jurors, so that opened up more seats for the public, and so more people did get in than before. And then the overflow courtroom was packed. Pastor Freddie Haynes from Friendship West, that is the Karmelo Anthony's family pastor, bust in tons of people, I would say dozens and dozens of people, to watch these proceedings, and they filled and packed the overflow courtroom to the point that even that was packed and people couldn't get in.
I didn't mean to
Yeah,
interrupt
go
you,
ahead.
but I was surprised that this hearing wasn't held in the ceremonial courtroom, because there are double the amount of seats, and then do the streaming in another courtroom, or even the central jury room. I mean, there's areas and places in this courthouse that seat more people. And if the idea was, okay, we're going to open it up to the public sitting in and watching and having an overflow room, why not make it full access? Why not use every resource you have to give as many people as possible to be able to watch?
And to give people full context, there were two courtrooms that we operated out of today. The main courtroom, that's where Judge Sid Harle was presiding from. That seats about 70 people. That includes the Metcalf family, the Anthony family, a few from the public, and then you have that
And attorneys,
overflow.
yeah.
And then the overflow courtroom, which seats about 100, 120 people.
Yeah.
Right? So let's talk about Karmelo Anthony. He walks into the courtroom, and he is in a green jumpsuit. Not surprising to you?
No,
right?
I mean, anytime anybody's in custody for any offense, regardless of if it's murder or whatnot, and has been convicted and sentenced to a penitentiary term, if they come back for a hearing in front of a judge, there's no reason to dress them in civilian clothes. They only do that when a jury's in the box, so the jury doesn't know that the person's actually in custody. Obviously, this judge and everybody in the courtroom knew Karmelo was in custody, so there was no bias in bringing him out in a jumpsuit. What I did find particularly interesting is that they requested his shackles be removed, so his hands were free during the hearing, and the judge granted it. A lot of times, especially in a case like this, security was at an all-time high. It's kind of surprising to me that they agreed to do that, but it's humane and the right thing to do, and I'm glad that they did.
Well, and Judge said, look, that's not my decision, it's up to the bailiffs, and he did actually leave it up to the sheriff's department of whether or not they should take the handcuffs off, and he walked over and then took his handcuffs off. So.
And it's important to mention what you're seeing, the images you're seeing right now, is art done by Pat Lopez. She is the sketch artist scheduled for this trial. Because we don't have cameras inside that courtroom, that art is helping tell the story. And how important is for people to see that?
Well, it's important since, again, as you mentioned, there are no cameras inside the courtroom, and she's actually gotten a lot of praise from the judges. And in fact, in your interview with Judge Roach, he thought that she did a really good job, and it does help tell the story and put the public into that courtroom that obviously can't be in there.
Let's talk about major moments in this during this hearing. One, let's talk about the moment the ruling is made and the court doors open. What do you see? What do you hear?
There was quite a bit of emotion, as I can understand. Look, that Karmelo had a very large support group here. I didn't notice whether the Metcalf family was here or not. I think that maybe we're sitting in the front row.
They were sitting.
They were here.
They were sitting on one side.
But there was a lot. I would say that the general consensus was that 95% of the people there were in support of Karmelo. They were all wearing purple, which is his color that they've used. But yes, there was an overflow of emotion, not only inside the courthouse, but right here on the steps of the courthouse, which is, this is old as our Constitution, to have the right to gather and either protest or rally or whatnot on the steps of a courthouse. So there was nothing at all wrong with that. I can understand why the outburst and the emotion, because this is really the first victory that the Karmelo side has had since day one. Since the stabbing happened, the trial, the sentencing, this is the first real, hey, we got one here. And now, of course, it's got to continue to develop. And that mountain that the burden that the defense has to overcome to get a new trial is significant.
And Joe, and I was I was standing outside the courtroom when the attorneys, Russell Wilson and Justin Moore and others, Karmelo Anthony's team, walked up, and the crowd just started cheering. They were cheering, they were clapping, they're like, "Thank you." They feel very comfortable with this team that is going to handle his appeals.
The way you characterized it was you used the word victory, right? If you are representing Karmelo Anthony, what are you telling the family right now? What are you telling Karmelo about
listen,
this one?
I said, listen, this is a great day for us. We got what we wanted. Justice prevailed in removing the judge that we didn't want hearing the rest of the case off the case. But we're not, by no means does this mean you're walking out of this courthouse anytime soon. That is such a multi-step process to actually see him walk out those doors. Because quite honestly, even if it does, even a motion for a new trial is granted, which it very well may be over the next few days, they still have to go back to trial. There still has to be a jury that sees all the same evidence that was presented at the first trial. Austin Metcalf is not coming back, and that knife wound is still there. So it's not, that part of it does not change.
Okay. So let's set up for tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll have a hearing,
Yeah.
motion for a new trial. Who appoints this judge? What is this process like?
Yeah, so the judge is appointed, I believe, by Judge Wheelis,
Yes.
who's the presiding administrative judge in this area, as was mentioned. I have heard rumors that there is an individual that's already been picked that was kind of on wait, depending on the outcome of the case. I don't think it's been released publicly as to who that is, but certainly going to be somebody from a different county, probably somebody close, and somebody that's trusted by Judge Wheelis.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting because they're going to hear from several witnesses tomorrow, and there'll be evidence presented, and then they have to have a ruling pretty quickly on this. So there will be a ruling on whether or not he gets a new trial after all of this evidence is heard tomorrow, possibly by Friday, but it has to be done, I believe, by Monday, correct?
Yeah.
But the ruling is 75 days from the verdict.
Yeah.
Right.
75 days literally
Monday.
happens Friday up until Monday.
Okay.
So
Well, then it's going to come quickly, yeah.
let's talk this last set of questions because I know we're burning out
Yes,
here.
we are.
Their argument, the defense's argument, is one, public access. Again, we're going to be talking about they're going to be asking about the gentleman's agreement between both sides during the trial. How much does that play a role in all of this?
It's another strange aspect of this case, and I'm not sure I've ever been involved in a situation like that before. From a strategic standpoint or an operation standpoint, the idea that the two sides got together and basically said, hey, let's not put all our evidence on, I think that was a little weird, and the fact none of it was on the record. You know, when I'm trying a big case, high-profile case, a case that my client can face significant penitentiary time, I always make sure that the record is clean, that everything is put on the record, because that transcript is the evidence in the case. So not putting it on the record was an odd decision by both sides, quite honestly.
Well, and Russell Wilson says that. He says, look, we don't have anything to go back and look at. Where's the record? Because there were all these agreements, I believe, that were made between Bill Wertzke and Toby Shook and the defense team. And so he's like, well, how are we supposed to know what those agreements said? How are we supposed to defend him now during the appellate process if there's no record of what happened?
Right.
And this
And
sets
that's
up
unusual.
And this sets up a legal question too. You have Bill Wertzke, who was first chair, and now is he going to sit in the witness box?
Yeah, that's an issue that's going to have to be
Yeah.
addressed by this judge, because I think that the defense is going to want to call him as a witness, because he was a party to these conversations. He was a party. I think I saw Toby is also listed as one of the witnesses. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be an interesting kind of dynamic and dance that they have to do to figure that out.
And just to give people some context, he can't ask the questions to the witness if he is the
Yeah,
witness,
that's correct.
right? So what do you think happens?
Well, the question is, can you be a witness and an advocate in the same proceeding? If he's going to be on the witness stand, does that mean somebody else from the DA's office gets to ask him questions? I would assume that's probably the case.
Okay.
You know, Luke, we've read the affidavit, so we and the public has had access to the affidavit that was written by the defense attorneys, and so we do know some of what may be coming, evidence that they felt wasn't presented at trial because of these agreements, and that perhaps the defense didn't get to try the case that they wanted to try. They didn't get to question the witnesses. They didn't present any more character witnesses except Karmelo Anthony's mom, based on some of these agreements that were made, and I think that's going to be a huge part, obviously, of what we're going to hear tomorrow.
I think so too.
What role do you think, how much time Karmelo Anthony had to decide to testify come up tomorrow and possibly Friday?
Again, I don't know. I haven't read the transcript, if
Yeah.
that was on the record or not. I mean, I've heard rumors that Roach gave him 10 minutes to
Yeah,
decide.
between 5 and 30?
Something like that. Again, another point on appeal, a point for a new trial, potentially. We just got to see how it shakes out.
Okay. And last bit here, we have the Batson challenge. The defense did not like that 3 black jurors,
Yeah,
potential jurors,
I think
were
there's
dismissed.
very much a misconception on how that works.
Okay.
Those jurors were removed for other reasons than the fact that they were black.
Because they were educators.
That's whatever it may be. They can, the strikes can come for any reason whatsoever, so long as they're not racially motivated. So if those 3 individuals who happen to be African American were removed for various reasons, then there's nothing there. I think that's being made. They're making a much too big a deal of that.
Yeah. How long do you think these hearings last?
Day or two, especially with this one. Yeah.
Yeah, I keep looking down at my phone because I'm trying to get confirmation about the judge. We know who the judge is, and this judge is well known in this area, but we're trying to get confirmation that, in fact, this particular judge from a nearby county will be the one that is going to hear the rest of this.
Well, we want to thank you for joining us. Thank you, Todd.
Thank you for making me sweat on television.
Thank you,
Jordan.
thank you, Rebecca. You're watching After the Hearing on the Carmelo Anthony Specials Appeals. We will be back here tomorrow.